So good evening, everyone. Really pleased that you're all joining us tonight for another webinar in the Sussex Wildlife Trust webinar series. I'm Claire Blanco. I'm the manager of Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre. And tonight is also an opportunity to introduce you to one of my colleagues at Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre, Bob Foreman, who's been very involved in the work behind the Bees of Sussex publication. So Bob's here in case you've got any tricky questions for him at the end. I'd like to introduce you to James Power. Hi, James.
Hi, Claire.
James has had, as well as being the author of the Bees of Sussex, James has had quite a varied career in nature conservation, including a period working in Malawi, which sounds fascinating. But I first met James when he worked at Sussex Wildlife Trust, heading up the land management department there. And it's just been fantastic in the last few years, I don't know how many years, to see James getting super into bees. Really excited that you're joining us tonight, James, to tell us a bit about some of the bees in Sussex and the stories that they tell. I think your talk was going to be about 3/4 of an hour, is that right?
Yep.
There'll be time for questions at the end. So if people have any questions, please type them into the Q&A and we'll come back to those later. So let me check my cheat sheet. Have I said everything that I need to say? I think so. We are recording this webinar, so it will be available to watch back afterwards. And before we get started, Bob, is there anything you'd like to add, or should we come back to you at the end?
Yeah, come back to me at the end. There's nothing that immediately springs to mind. So
okay, if
I'm sure
anyone's got any questions about maps,
plenty.
Yeah,
Yes.
If anyone's got any questions about maps, Bob will be really happy to answer those. Okay, well, Bob and I will now turn our cameras off and hand over to you, James, for your talk.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Yeah, tonight I'm going to talk to you about 10 bees and the stories they tell. Each of the bees that I'm going to talk to you about tonight has a different twist, a different insight into behaviours or what's going on with bees. So I thought these 10 species will give you a flavour of some quite interesting developments that are taking place in the world of bees at the moment. So yeah, just to start off with, I introduce myself. So as Claire said, I've worked in nature conservation for more years than I care to remember. Actually, it's at least 30, and might be getting up towards 40. But anyway, it's been a fantastic career. I worked with lots of different brilliant organisations, including, as Claire said, the Sussex Wildlife Trust, where I actually spent 11 years working with the land management team. So I worked with some great people at the Wildlife Trust. The other thing I'm always grateful to the Wildlife Trust for is that it's actually while I was working for the trust that actually the spark sort of was lit in my brain, and my passion and enthusiasm for bees and wasps. We should never forget the wasps. Was actually started. So I was working for the Wildlife Trust, and as I say, I was working for this absolutely fantastic team in looking after the trust nature reserves. But I found that in my job, I was the person who was stuck in the office all the time, and sort of working through things to do with budgets or managing staff or looking at strategy or policy or whatever. And I had these fantastic colleagues who'd come home at the end of every day celebrating all the exciting things that they'd seen. And over time, I realised that, hang on a minute, when I started out in my career in nature conservation, I was spending a lot of time out there looking at things and discovering things too. So as much as I enjoyed my job, I also thought, maybe somewhere along the way I've lost a bit of my direction. But anyway, it just happened that I was sitting in the kitchen at Woods Mill one day, one September, and a hornet landed at my feet, and it was fantastic. It was a perfect trigger for a completely new passion, because I've been looking for something at that time. and that basically launched me into a world of studying bees and wasps. So I'm very grateful to the Sussex Wildlife Trust, not just for a fantastic career working for them, but also for giving me the opportunity to discover a world of bees and wasps. But of course, that sort of happened about, I don't know, 15 or so years ago now. And it's over the last 3.5 years that my passion for bees especially has gone quite deep. And I've actually spent the last 3.5 years working on the Bees of Sussex, which I'm excited to say is actually about to come out. I'm expecting delivery of my copies of the books even this week. So if you're interested in buying a copy of the book, then I'll be telling you later on in the talk how you can order one. But basically everything I'm going to talk to you about tonight is based on what I've learned through my work on researching the Bees of Sussex. Before I go into the 10 stories, I do need to say a quick thank you to the different organisations that have helped me with the production of the Bees of Sussex. So West Sussex County Council, East Sussex County Council, South Downs National Park Authority, South Downs National Park Trust, and also the Sussex Wildlife Trust have all got passionately behind the production of this book, and actually between them have completely covered the cost of its production and design. So a huge thank you to them. I also need to say an enormous thank you. I can't thank the Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre enough, and the same with the Bees, Wasps and Ants Recording Society. Both these organisations have provided all of the data that's gone into the book. It's about 56,000 records altogether, there or thereabouts. And I could not have done this project without their support. And the other thing I've done, partly in large part, is recognition of that help and support I had from them. All of the proceeds from the sale of the book will be going to support their work going forwards. Final thing to say before I start talking to you about these 10 stories about bees is I'm not going to be talking to you about honeybees. Now, it's a funny thing to start with, but I felt I had to mention it at the beginning because, well, maybe it's not a surprise, but the number of times when I meet people when I'm out and about and I start talking to them about my interest in bees, the number of times I'm actually asked, "Oh, do you keep bees then?" And I have to say, actually, no, sorry, I don't. And I'm actually myself interested in all of the other species of wild bee in Sussex. There's only one species of honeybee in Sussex, but actually there's another 228 species of bee in the county that don't get anything like the same recognition that the wild bees do. And the other thing just to flag is that amazing as fascinating as honeybees are, in a way they're maybe better thought of as domesticated livestock, because 9 times out of 10, if you see a honeybee somewhere, it's because somewhere has placed a honeybee nearby. So my interest is actually the wild bees, the other 228 species, so not honeybees. So yeah, let's start with these stories. So this first story is about a bumblebee that goes by the name of Cullum's bumblebee. Now, sadly, this is a bumblebee that will not be coming back. It really has gone for good. It's gone through quite a catastrophic decline, and I'll show you that in the next few slides. This photograph is actually taken of the last specimen that was ever caught in Sussex. So this is of a male, and if you can read the text that's upside down in in the red circle in the bottom right of your screen, you'll see that it's written as Seaford, and there is also a year date, 23. So this was a specimen that was caught in 1923 from Seaford, and this is the last time that this bumblebee was seen in the county. There was a puzzle for the early naturalists who were studying this bee because they couldn't work out where the females were. Because it's the females are actually almost identical to another species, which is called the red-tailed bumblebee, which is a very common species that you'll have seen out and about in your walks in the countryside, or possibly even in your gardens. And although the specimen that's on the staging with the pin attached is actually a Cullum's bumblebee, you can see from the scientific name that I've circled at the bottom there, B. lapidarius, which is that's the scientific name for the red-tailed bumblebee. You can see that this was actually a misidentification. It wasn't actually until 1926 that people connected the females to the males, by which time, of course, this bumblebee had become extinct in Sussex. It had been gone since 1923. This is what we know about the distribution of this bumblebee in Sussex up until it became extinct. There are, I think it's 5 records from just these 3 locations, but actually it's thought that it was much, much more widely distributed than this. It's just that actually, in truth, there weren't that many people recording bumblebees 100 years ago. And altogether, there's only about been 25 records for this bumblebee. So there's about just under a quarter of these are actually from Sussex. So why did Cullum's bumblebee disappear from the county? Well, as I'm sure you're all very familiar with, there's been an awful lot of change in the Sussex and British countryside over the last 100 and something years. Large areas of flowerich grassland have been ploughed up, and this process really kicked off in the late 19th century when large quantities of guano were being imported, but it really kicked off with the First and then the Second World Wars, when there was a real urgent need to feed the country. The consequence has been that acres and acres of flowerich grassland have been lost. And these bumblebees, Cullum's bumblebee and other species too, they need large areas, large acreages of wildflowers, particularly clovers and vetches, if they're going to be able to gather all the pollen and nectar that they need to take back to their nests to rear their young. Of course, it's not just about changes in the farmed landscape. It's also, Sussex is a county that's seen an awful lot of urbanisation, lots of house building and road building, etc. And this, for example, is an aerial photograph taken of the Sussex coast. It's actually Peacehaven in the foreground, and you might just be able to make out some roads that actually in time became Saltdean. And these areas would not so long ago have been large areas of species-rich grassland too. So combination of changes to the way the countryside is farmed in combination with lots of house building really spelt the end for this species of bumblebee. The tragedy is that, of course, this process has been underway not just in Sussex, but it's all across Western Europe too. And on this slide, you can see two yellow dots. One just catches part of Denmark, and the other is an island that's off the coast of Sweden. Well, actually, this is the most recent distribution map that I could find for this species for covering Europe. And in fact, it's gone from Denmark and Sweden too. So the fear is, if you like, that actually this bumblebee is now extinct in Western Europe. Happily, it does still survive in Asia, but it's a very depressing prospect, and it's the chances of this species ever coming back to Sussex or even into Western Europe are pretty slim. Species number 2 that I wanted to talk to you about is a little bit more hopeful, I think, hopefully, because although we thought for a long time that this one might well be gone too, actually there may possibly be a small population still surviving in Sussex, and I'll tell you why in a moment. So broken belted bumblebee has a name basically because there's a line of black hairs on the front of the abdomen, but I have to say this character is really difficult to see, so it's even experts often miss this one. So just like Cullum's bumblebee, the broken belted bumblebee is a species that needs large areas of flower-rich grassland, and again it's this relationship with clovers and vetches that's so important. And again, because we've lost so much of that fantastic grassland from our countryside, this bumblebee has gone through a catastrophic decline too. This map is a map of Britain, and it shows the distribution of the broken belted bumblebee in the country. The darker dots are the older records, the historic records, whereas the red dots are more modern records. And actually, if you can see the concentration of modern records, the red dots up in the north of Scotland, you can see that this species has retreated and disappeared from much of southern England. There are clusters of population still on places like Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, but it's a species that's disappeared from vast areas of the country. We know, however, that it was present on the South Downs near to Brighton. Actually, we know this because there was a chap or a family business called Brazener Brothers based on Lewis Road in Brighton. And they sold specimens. They sold a lot of, for example, stuffed birds or butterflies that were pinned. And they also offered for sale bumblebees that were collected locally. Now, happily, whatever you might think of that as a practice, happily for me at least, the bumblebee collection has ended up in the Booth Museum in Brighton. So I've been able to go through all of the brazen and material, and I found quite a few specimens from Sussex, all from the Brighton Downs. And in fact, in the 1940s, over a period of several years, Alfred Brazener collected something like 58 different specimens of this bumblebee from the Brighton Downs, and that's actually the only concrete evidence that we have that this bee was ever present in Sussex. So those specimens have survived, but his last collected specimen was from 1948, and for a long time we thought that actually that was the end of the broken-belted bumblebee in Sussex, and that it had gone the same way as as Cullum's bumblebee. There's a sort of an intriguing little puzzle that I haven't been able to fully resolve, which is, you can see this area here circled, and this is Romney Marsh in Kent. If you zoom in on it a bit closer, you can see that the county boundary here is a bit wiggly, and part of Romney Marsh is actually in Sussex. Now, we know for a fact from work that's been going on in Kent that the broken-belted bumblebee was actually still present in the area that I've drawn the arrow to up to 2014. Now, the puzzle is that the intriguing thing rather is that the habitat on either side of that red line, the county boundary, is absolutely identical. So the habitat on the left-hand side of the line just happens to be in Sussex, but it's identical habitat. Now, unfortunately for me, this area is actually a live firing range, so gaining access is extremely problematic, extremely difficult. And so, in the course of preparing the Bees of Sussex, I haven't actually been able to gain access. But there's a strong belief that if the broken-belted bumblebee was present in Kent up until 2014, there's every reason to assume that it was also present in Sussex at that time. But wouldn't it be amazing if we could actually prove that? But that'll have to wait for the next edition of the Bees of Sussex. Species number 3 that I wanted to talk to you about is the Fringe-horned mason bee, which is an absolutely gorgeous bee. It has these sort of bright orange hairs on the back of the thorax. And this is one that is sadly looks like it might be on the way out in the county. So it's quite an interesting species. It has a very different set of requirements to the two species of bumblebee that I've talked about just now. What it absolutely loves are woodland clearings. So when we had a countryside with lots of woodland that was being regularly managed, regularly coppiced, this bumblebee would have been everywhere, and we would have found it in pretty much every woodland in the county. But as with the way our countryside is farmed, there are also been huge changes in the way that our woodlands are managed as well, and a lot of the sort of programs of active annual management that we used to have pretty much died out. Obviously, there are exceptions, but it's nothing like on the scale that we had in the past. And what this bee absolutely loves are the flowering plants that germinate after an area of woodland has been cleared. And it loves nothing more than a lovely patch of bugle. It has this special adaptation on its tongue, which is a series of hooks that it uses to scrape out the pollen, because these plants have very narrow flower tubes but also produce lots of the pollen that the bee wants to take back to its nest. So it has these hooks on its tongue that it uses to scrape out the pollen. The other thing that's unusual about it is that it nests in dead wood. So species like bumblebees that we've talked about before, they'll use abandoned mouse nests, for example, or you might have species of mining bee that will excavate a nest into the soil, into the ground. This is one of the species that actually makes its nest in dead and decaying wood. And if you look carefully, you might be able to spot the nest entrance. And I've just circle it for you here. The other thing that makes this species unusual, I mean, there are others that do this as well, but not so many, but actually the female bee actually has the strength in her jaws to actually chew out the wood and make a tunnel. So it's a very powerful insect. And obviously the wood has to be quite rotten and decayed for it to be able to make its way in. So this is this map is a map of Sussex. So we've got Chichester Harbour over on the left-hand side, and we've got Romney Marsh over on the right-hand side. And this is the distribution of the fringe-horned mason bee since the year 2000. You can see there's a cluster of records over in West Sussex and just the one over in East Sussex. Well, those in West Sussex, we haven't had any records from this area since 2013. The last record from 2013 was from Rural Wood, which is just on the East and South Downs, and there were populations found on the sort of hanger woods on the tops of the downs over in West Sussex before this date, but sadly nothing since 2013. And that means that the most recent record for this species is actually over in the east of the county at Thor Wood, which is a fabulous RSPB reserve not far from Hastings. Now, the fringe-horned mason bee was last seen here in 2018, so fingers crossed it's still here in this woodland. And the chances are it probably still is, but we've been looking for the last couple of years, but without any success. And it's also possible that it's still out there in other woodlands that we haven't been able to survey. But if you think how widespread and common this species was in the days when woodland was very actively managed in Sussex, it's not a very cheerful prospect looking forwards. So this is a species that sadly we may lose before too long. Trying to cheer you up a bit again, if I can. It's not all gloom and doom. Story number 4 is about the Ruderal bumblebee, which is another species of bumblebee that for a long time was thought to be heading towards extinction. So we thought it was heading the same way as Cullum's bumblebee, the very first species that I spoke about. But in this particular case, there's been some signs of recovery. But as well as talking to you a bit about the Ruderal bumblebee, I just wanted to talk quickly about the short-haired bumblebee, which is a species that has actually indirectly helped the Ruderal bumblebee. In the case of the short-haired bumblebee, this is maybe a story of so near and yet so far, because this species became extinct in the late 1980s, and and the last records were made from Romney Marsh. So starting in 2009, there was an effort to re-establish this bumblebee in Britain. There was a two-pronged approach was taken. First strategy was to release 204 queen bumblebees that had been collected from a series of sites in southern Sweden. And these were released over a number of years. And this is a photograph actually of one shortly after it's been released into the wild. And then the other thing that the project that was underway in the Romney Marsh area undertook was to talk to lots and lots of landowners, many of whom got on board very enthusiastically and worked with the project to create large areas of species-rich grassland. So they established lots of areas of red clover and vetch, etc. And in the end, hundreds of acres of new species-rich grassland have been created. Now, sadly, while it's still possible that the short-haired bumblebee has taken hold there, no queens have been seen since the last release was undertaken. So it's probable actually that it hasn't succeeded. But nonetheless, lots of other species of scarce bumblebee have benefited, including, for example, the Ruderal bumblebee, which actually has increased the population in that area, increased by about 8-fold over the course of the 10 years that the project was running. So actually, it's a really good illustration of how targeted conservation effort can have really, really significant benefits. Even more cheerful subject is the Downland furrow bee. This is a species of solitary bee that we all thought had gone from the county, but actually has made a recovery, so much to everybody's amazement. So this was its distribution in Sussex from the very first record way back in 1881 up until the very last record in 1944. And during this time, it was well established on the downs in East Sussex. And outside Sussex, it was only actually known from Kent and Dorset. So it's a species that's got very strong links to the county. And actually, in Kent and Dorset, there was never a very strong populations established. Sadly, though, in 1944 it disappeared. There were no further records made, and actually that was the situation up until 2004, and people thought this was a bee that we would never see in the county ever again, or even indeed in Britain, because it had gone from across the country. Happily, though, in 2004, a very well-known entomologist by the name of Stephen Falk undertook a survey of the Downs in East Sussex, and to his amazement, he came across a population of this solitary bee at Sutherland Farm, Sussex Wildlife Trust, fantastic nature reserve just outside Lewes. Not only did he find it at Sutherland Farm, but he found it all across the area where it had been known from up until 1944. In fact, I think Stephen found it on about 7 sites altogether during this time, and subsequently it's been found at several other locations as well, including there's a vineyard near Alfriston that supports the population, and also there's sort of arable field margins down towards Kingston, south of Lewes, where it's also been found. So clearly this bee is well established in this landscape once again. Intriguingly, though, in 2019, a surveyor found a new population in a completely new location, in an area where it had never been found before. This was on an abandoned water company reservoir not far from Slindon. Well, not only did he find it in 2019, but he also found it in 2020. And I was lucky to head back to the same area in 2022, where I also found it. So it's clearly well established in this location too. Unfortunately, so far, we haven't been able to establish if it's more widely established in this part of Sussex, but I think there's every reason to assume that it is. So the question then is, what was it between 1944 and 2004 when it was rediscovered? Was it actually just simply a question of it being overlooked, or was it here, and was it here all along? Well, to be honest, I think this is unlikely, because one of the best ways of finding this bee is just to look at the flower heads of greater knapweed. Greater knapweed, as many of you will know, is a very big, obvious, showy plant, and it's very easy to see the bee sort of feeding head down in the flower heads. So if it was here, I'm sure people would have found it. More likely is its recovery is to do with climate change, and this is something I'm going to come back to again. This is the sort of chart that I'm sure you're all very, very familiar with. It shows the change in temperature against an average temperature between the 1950s and 1980s, and you see clearly that there's a trend of a warming climate. And this has had a major impact on the species of bee that are colonised or present in Sussex. I'll come back to that in a moment. Moving on, species number 6, another species that's a real Sussex speciality, is the potter flower bee. Now, this one is a species that really is literally clinging on in the county. We're lucky still to have it. Its population, it's known in the county from only the one location, which is Seaford Head, a location I'm sure is very familiar to many of you. And this is the only place where it's now found in the county. And it's got the perfect combination of sandy soil on top of the chalk, so it nests in the sand and can forage on the chalk grass and adjoining the cliff edge. And actually, one of the best places to see this bee nesting is one of the most accessible locations you could have is the steps that are at the bottom of Hope Gap at just by Seaford Head. And if you're there at the right time of year, you might be lucky to see females coming back to the cliff face rather, to sort of either dig out a nest burrow or to carry pollen and nectar into the burrow. The other thing that helps them at this location is ground ivy. Ground ivy seems to be a plant that's particularly important with the potter flower bee. And what it does is obviously it does collect nectar from this plant to feed on and to transport back to the nest for the larvae to feed on. But actually, it also uses it to line the nests. So actually, what it does is it takes a little supply of nectar back to the nest entrance, and which is where it mixes it with soil, and then it sort of lines the brood cell that it's creating with this mixture of nectar and soil. And when it sets, it has this sort of consistency of eggshell. It makes this quite hard exterior to to the cells, and you can imagine that gives the developing bee very, very good protection from either the elements or from sort of molds or fungi that might otherwise want to feed on the developing bee. The other thing that is to its advantage at Seaford Head is plants like stinking iris. This is one of the plants it visits to get pollen. But it'll also visit plants like various sorts of clover or vetch. But also work done here showing that it's also very reliant on plants like field maple, which it'll visit to collect pollen as well. So this is a map of its distribution in Britain over time. And you can see that, okay, it hasn't been ever recorded much further north than Norfolk, for example. So it's very much a species that historically was in southern England. But these days, it's only known from 3 locations, and you'll notice that they're all actually on the coast. So there's a very strong, seemingly quite robust colony in Dorset on the Tank Ranges near to Lulworth. There's also a population on the chalk cliffs on the eastern side of the Isle of Wight. There's also our population at Seaford Head. Sorry, just going back quickly on that one, just to say that the population that we have at Seaford Head is of course very vulnerable to cliff collapse. So I think the average for that stretch of coast is on average about a metre of the coast drops every year into the sea from erosion. That's not to say every section loses a metre a year, but that's the average over time. So you can see that it's not surprising that quite large proportions of the colony can be lost at any one time. So it is actually quite a vulnerable species in Sussex. Another species to talk about, species number 7, is the ivy bee, which is in complete contrast to the species I've just been talking about. And this is one that I'm sure you've probably seen, even if you haven't been aware of what you were looking at. So this is a type of solitary bee. It's called the ivy bee. And that, as the name suggests, this is a species that's very, very dependent on ivy for its pollen. So let's skip past that. So this was its distribution up until 2004. So this bee was not known from Sussex at all. In fact, it wasn't known from Britain until I think it was about, I'm not sure the exact date, it might be 2002, 2003. But 2004 is the year that it turned up in Sussex. The very first record was made in Hastings, in fact. And since 2004, it's turned up absolutely everywhere. 19 years later, it's all over the place. In fact, even on this map, where there are gaps, I guarantee that if there's a patch of ivy filling the gap in the gap, then I'm sure you'd find that you'd had the ivy bee there. So this is a species that's spread rapidly from its arrival here 19 years ago. And again, we believe quite strongly, very strongly, in fact, that it's the climate that is driving this change. So if you think about it, temperature is, or the ability of a bee to respond to the environment is very much dependent on various factors, but one of the main ones is what the temperature is from day to day. And as the climate warms, we're finding that more and more species are able to colonise the country. Sorry, colonise Sussex. So, for example, it's not just the ivy bee that's moved into Sussex since the year 2000, and altogether we've had about 10 new species, which is at the rate of one every 2 or every 3 years. And they're all moving in quite rapidly. But of course, as we get new species coming in, we're also losing species because, for example, species of bumblebees I've talked about struggle in these sort of warmer temperatures and are generally moving more northerly. So not only are we've already seen 10 species arrive in the county, but actually there's no reason to think that process of arrival will stop anytime soon. And even just this last year, back in April 2023, a new species of bee turned up in Hampshire, not in Sussex, but there's no reason to think it won't turn up here as well. This is the red-bellied mining bee, which is a willow specialist. And this species was found not far from the New Forest in Hampshire back in April, and it's just one of a number of species that have turned up in Britain in the last few years, but haven't yet arrived in the county. So, and I'm pretty sure that, okay, I can say that there's 229 species of bee here in Sussex at the moment, but I'm sure within 5 years that number will have increased again. So watch this space on that one. Species number 8 is the violet carpenter bee, and this is one that might well be establishing itself here in Sussex for the first time. And actually, it's one that I'm hoping that you might be able to help me with. I'll come on to that in a moment. So yeah, the violet carpenter bee was first seen in Sussex in 1993. Before that time, it hadn't been recorded here ever before. It's a bit of a sad story, actually, this first record, because there was basically what was happening was that somebody in Worthing had a bird table in their garden, and were a bit upset to see that a bee had started excavating a nest in the leg of the bird table. So to save the bird table, I'm afraid they killed the bee, which is a great pity because it was obviously trying to establish a nest. But the one good part of the story is that they were so curious about this bee that they found a local bee expert who was able to tell them what it was, and he confirmed that it was actually the very first violet carpenter bee that had ever been seen in Sussex. So where are we today with the violet carpenter bee? Well, in 2003, it was confirmed from up near East Grinstead. And then just last year, in March last year, a male violet carpenter bee was found over at East Grinstead. So these are the two records that I've circled on the screen. You'll also see that there are a cluster of other dots on the map that are in red, and these are probably, to be fair, probably are also records for the violet carpenter bee. But in truth, the separating this species of bee from another species of carpenter bee is actually very, very difficult. And without specimens, it hasn't been possible to confirm whether or not these other sightings are actually the same species of bee. Having said that, the chances are that they were of the violet carpenter bee. And it's a strong indication that this bee is starting to move quite rapidly, probably into Sussex. The thing, though, is that, as I say, the violet carpenter bee is very, very similar to another species of carpenter bee, which, although this other species hasn't yet been found in Britain, it's spreading on the continent too, and there's every chance that it'll turn up in Sussex too. So we really need to either have photographs of a male, as on this slide here, or we need to have sight of a specimen. And the great thing with the males, unlike the females, is that they can be identified in the field. So the other species of carpenter bee that is possibly going to turn up has completely dark antennae, whereas the violet carpenter bee has this sort of reddish marking at the tip of the antennae. So if you next spring, or actually this bee can be active at any time of the year. So if you come across a bee that's large and black and has these sort of extraordinarily dark, glossy wings, but with these sort of reddish tips to the antennae, then that is going to be a violet carpenter bee, and I would love to hear from you. So yes, if you see this bee in Sussex, please, please, please let me know, because wouldn't it be great if we can demonstrate that this bee has become established in the county. And as I say, my contact details will be circulated after the webinar by the Wildlife Trust. So moving on, the species number 9 is called the black-thighed Epeolus. So up until now, I've been talking about species that are shifting their geographical range, that are moving into new places, new areas. But at the same time, there are other species that are staying in the same areas, but are actually starting to change their behaviour. And we're not quite sure really what's driving this, but it's happening with quite a few different species. And the black-thighed Epeolus is one such species. So unlike all of the other species of bee that I've talked about so far, this one is what's called a cuckoo bee. And it's about a fifth of all the bees in Sussex, in fact in Britain as a whole, that are what are called cuckoo bees. So these are bees that don't worry about collecting pollen and transporting it back to a nest for their offspring to feed on. What they do is they have different strategies to enable them to gain access to a nest that's already been supplied with pollen by a different species of bee. And this is, as you can imagine, this is a very successful strategy, which explains why there are so many species that are cuckoos. So the black-thighed Epiolus is an interesting one because it targets a number of different species of solitary bee. So it targets the nests of a species called Davies colletes, the hairy saddled colletes, the sea aster bee, and also the bare saddled colletes. And you can see that these are all very similar looking bees. Each has a very similar life cycle, but they do have distinct differences in what the type of plants that they collect forage from and where they excavate and build their nests. Now, intriguingly, just this last year, at 2 sites in Sussex, the black-thighed Epiolus was seen flying very close to 2 ivy bee nests. So, for example, there's a site not far from Plumpton, and also there's a fantastic colony of the ivy bee at Seven Sisters Country Park. There's a sort of bare vertical bank on the left as you walk down towards the coast, and it's populated by thousands of ivy bees in the autumn. And to my amazement, just this last year, there were quite a few black-thighed Epiolus flying around and investigating nests of this bee. Now, this behaviour was first reported in Britain just in 2022, and actually had 2 or 3 years before that had been reported in Germany. But these are the only occasions that this behaviour has been observed with this species of cuckoo bee. So it's a suggestion that the black-thighed Epiolus has maybe adopted a new species of host, which, given that the ivy bee is so well established in Sussex, you can see why it's to the cuckoo's advantage, because there's lots of free food out there. Now, species number 10 is a puzzle. And actually, I think the conclusion is going to be that although this species is on the British list and is very much seen as a Sussex species, really there's a lot of scepticism actually about the authenticity of this record. And I'll tell you why. In fact, actually, here's the reason why. There's a specimen for this bee that survives in the Natural History Museum. Now, there are only 2 records for the 5-spined ruffitis in Britain overall, and both of these records are from this area in Sussex. So it's recorded twice, so in 1877 and then again in 1878 from Guestling, which is a village just outside Hastings, for those of you who don't know that area of the county. Now, these records were made by the Reverend Bloomfield, who was a member of the Hastings and East Sussex Natural History Society, and he was a leading light in the society at the time. So, for example, he regularly wrote the nature notes for the society's newsletter, and he also regularly led guided walks going out looking for fungi, for example. And these would often end up back at the rectory afterwards, where people would have tea and discuss what they'd been out to look at. Now, all we know about these records is that he says these came from woodland at Guestling. Now, we don't know which wood that he found them in, apparently found them. But this, for example, is a photograph of Guestling wood, which is very typical of all of the other woodlands that are in the area. You can see it's broadleaf woodland. There's a nice ride going through it. At the time, I would imagine it was being actively managed and coppiced, so it was a busy managed woodland, probably. And then you contrast this with where we know this bee can be found in southwest Germany, for example, and it's unrecognisable as habitat compared to what we have in Guestling, let alone across Sussex. So this is an upland area in southwest Germany where you can see there's this fabulous expanse of very, very species-rich, flower-rich grassland, but also it's an area where it's a very hot climate in the summer months. So it's a world away from what we have in Sussex. So we're very sceptical about the validity of these records. So this bee has made it into the Bees of Sussex, into the atlas, but in truth, I think we should be very doubtful about whether or not it's actually an authentic record. Quite what the motives were or the reasons why it's appeared in the record is I can't say. But just looking at the evidence, you have to say it's very, very doubtful. So that's my 10 bee stories. Those are the 10 stories that I wanted to run through with you. Just to come back to the book, I can't forget the book, can I? I've been working on this for the last 3.5 years, and the book is on its way from the printers as I speak. I'm told it's been loaded up onto the lorry today or tomorrow, in fact, and we'll be back with the publisher at the end of this week. And if you're interested in ordering a copy, please do. Remember, the proceeds are being shared between the Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre and with Bee Wars. There's something like 850 photographs, 450 maps. Thank you, Bob, for the maps. They're amazing, absolutely brilliant. And it is also the very first account of the bees of the county. So if you are tempted to buy a copy, then I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Questions?
Great, thank you, James. And just to say, we at Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre are super excited to see your book. We cannot wait. So, and yeah, having seen some of the spreads that are there on the Nature Bureau website as well, it looks fantastic. And I hope lots of people are taking up the pre-publication offer that's available at the moment. So while we're here, we have got questions flooding in, so let's go straight to them. Danielle says she saw a bumblebee yesterday flying around her garden. She didn't realize they could survive the frost. Where do they fly to in these conditions? What are they doing?
That's a very good question, because it's another consequence of climate change, in fact. Also to do with what we're planting in our garden. So there are plants that we have in our gardens that are flowering at this time of year, and with the change in climate, this is a species of bumblebee. Almost certainly it'll be the buff-tailed bumblebee that you've seen, and they're managing to keep their colonies going. So the usual cycle with a bumblebee is that the new queens emerge from a nest in the late summer, and then they go into hibernation, and then they emerge the following spring, where they'll then start off a new nest. But with the buff-tailed bumblebee, what we're finding is that there's a proportion of the queens each autumn actually starting off a new colony straight away. So rather than going into hibernation, they're actually keeping going through the winter for as long as they can. What we're also finding is that actually these queens are not, in fact, being very successful. So there might be the odd male or daughter queen that emerges from the nest towards the end of the cycle, but generally the nests are failing. But actually, it's just another of those clues or signs that insects, invertebrates often give us about the way the climate is shifting.
Thanks. Got a question from Barry. James, which is your favourite bee and why?
Well, I mean, Barry, it can only be the Downland furrow bee, can't it? I mean, it's a bee that really needs to be celebrated in Sussex. Sussex has the national range for this bee, so we have it on the Eastern Downs around sort of going from Brighton to Eastbourne, and we also have a population over near Slindon. But across the country, that's it. So we have a national responsibility for this one, and it's a beautiful small bee, and it's a great one to find when it's feeding on greater knapweed.
Lovely. Getting lots of questions about ivy bees. Where do they come from? Are they a threat? Are they going to be putting pressure onto other pollinators? Can you tell us any more about ivy bees?
Yeah, very happy to. But the ebb and flow in populations is just a normal part of the way bees behave. So we've never had a static set number of species of bee present in Sussex. So it's something that just ebbs and flows as populations change, habitat changes, climate changes, or whatever. And what we're seeing at the moment is with the climate shifting so rapidly. Yes, we're seeing lots of species colonize Britain. One of the most successful has been the ivy bee, but it's not a particular threat to other species. In fact, to be honest, it's something to celebrate because it's just become part of our native fauna. In terms of where they are, they're a ground nesting species. So I've seen them nesting in bare vertical banks of soil down at Seven Sisters, or I live in Lewis, and they've been nesting for a number of years on a road verge on the side of up in part of the town. So yeah, they could turn up anywhere that's got shortish level to vertical vegetation to bare soil. There's a chance that they'll nest.
Getting quite a few questions relating to people's gardens. So Martin's message say he's got a photo of a broken belted bumblebee in his Storrington garden. So should we tell him that you'd like more information on that?
I would love more information on it. But yeah, if you have a photograph, please send it to me. I'd love to see that.
Right,
Um,
okay.
yeah, I'd love that. I mean, I haven't really talked much about gardens, but one of the things that I do talk about in the book is the things that you can do in a garden. And that it's not to help bees. It's not none of it is rocket science. I've got sort of 10 basic principles that I'd love people to follow, and it really works. So it's things like choosing plants that have a range of plants that have so you have a long flowering season. It's about choosing plants with different flower shapes, for example. So there's lots of things you can do and have a really significant, big impact on bee populations.
Great. And Lynn has noticed that her lavender bushes are shared by several different species of bees. She's just wondering, is that normal or are bees usually territorial?
Some species are very territorial. So there's one species that often turns up in gardens. It's called the wool carder bee. And actually, the males are known really to be a bit of a bully. I mean, they're magnificent insects. So, but they're unusual because they're larger than the females. Usually, it's the other way around. And they also have some spines at the tip of the abdomen. And what they do is they find a flowering plant, or like Jamanda sage or something like that, and that they'll sort of set up a territory and they'll patrol around it and they'll drive other bees away to make sure that that plant is available for the female to come and feed on. And if they have to be a bit more persistent, they will actually clench another bee with their abdomen and use their spines to crush them and drive them away. And they will actually even take on small bumblebees, so they can be quite aggressive. I have to say that's unusual behaviour, and most species will be much more tolerant. I mean, they will shift around and move as other species move in, but and there is a level of competition going on, but they are generally quite tolerant of each other.
Right. People are also very interested in the violet carpenter bee. Um, what kind of habitat should people be looking for it in?
It's one of the reasons why I've picked it out for the talk is actually it's one that often turns up in gardens. So it's definitely one to look out for around gardens. So I would say gardens are, and maybe orchards, places like that. But the key thing for them is having places to nest. So they nest in sort of dead or decaying wood. So if you've got an apple tree or an old fruit tree, you might find that they'll take up residence in a sort of a decaying or dead limb. So it's one of the things I'm quite keen to say to people is if you do have fruit trees in your garden or trees generally in your garden, obviously you have to prune them to keep them safe. But if you can keep bits of dead wood on the tree, then do, because there's an opportunity for something to create a nest.
Thanks. You mentioned at the beginning that it was a hornet that kicked off your interest in bees and wasps. Um, a couple of people are asking, are you worried about the effect of the arrival of the Asian hornet on native species? Are hornets a threat to bees?
I mean, it is a concern, absolutely, definitely. They don't just predate other sort of honeybees or other species of bee, but they will, take things like spiders or whatever. But I'm afraid it's one of those things that I think, honestly, I think it's too late. They are here in Sussex. I know there are records from near Newhaven and I think over towards Hastings in the last 2 or 3 years. Um, and there's been this big spike in records, especially in Kent this last year. I think was it something like 50 something sightings of the Asian hornet this last year. And I've seen it myself in France, and it's all over the country. So I'm afraid it's one of those species that we're not actually going to be able to remove, and it's something that our native fauna will need to adapt to. So it is going to have an impact.
Mm. Okay, moving on to changing the subject, we've got a question from Janine who says she's a forest school practitioner and would like to know if you have info packs to encourage children to learn about bees and not be afraid.
I'm possibly not the right person to ask, because I'm just a private individual pursuing my interest in bees. But I would think it's the Sussex Wildlife Trust would be the place to probably start. I don't. Can you help with that, Claire?
I can certainly pass that one on. Yes.
Yeah.
And the fantastic thing about publishing a book is it's then available for people to use and use that information to develop different resources
Yeah.
and how they work with all sorts of different groups. So that's fantastic. While we have Bob here, I should ask if Bob's got any questions for James.
Oh, I'm sure I've got loads. No, I haven't actually, but I would say that I'd like to take this opportunity to say what a pleasure it was to actually be involved with this book. It's obviously going to be a fantastic publication. I can't wait to see it, and how much I thoroughly enjoyed, actually having the opportunity to help out with it. And I hope my efforts are worthy of the book.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I obviously it's got the book's got my name on it, but I mean it's been a massive collaborative effort. So I mean the Record Centre has been absolutely fantastic. I couldn't have done it without Bob and the team based at Woods Mill. There's also all the people who are involved in biological recording, been absolutely fantastic with their records and sharing photographs to use. I mean, there's as I think I said earlier, there's 850 photographs in this book, so that's involved about 50 or 60 different photographers. So the book has been this fantastic collaborative effort. So, but number one in terms of my appreciation comes out as the Record Centre, because I couldn't have done it without you,
Bob.
Bob.
Well, I think our time here is just about drawing to a close. James, we've had lots more questions than I've been able to get through talking with you now, but I know you've kindly offered to take a look at the questions afterwards and work with Sussex Wildlife Trust on looking at whether we could put out some more answers to those via a blog or something. So I'll follow up on that with you. And sorry to anyone if you did ask a question or if you had your hand up when I haven't come to you. Sorry, this has been a really popular topic and we've had over 300 people watching this webinar tonight, which has just been great. And we've just to finish on a little bit of extra information from Sussex Wildlife Trust ecologist Alex Wesley. He's mentioned that Bumblebee conservation do great fold-out charts for bumblebees, which could be used for kids. So a tip there if you want to share the passion in for bees and bumblebees. And I think when I end this webinar, it will take you through to a page on the Sussex Wildlife Trust website, which includes a link to the publisher's website where you can pre-order your copy of the Bees of Sussex, should you so wish. James, is there anything else you'd like to say before we go?
No, I'll just say, well, just thank you to everybody for joining us tonight. I hope you found the talk enjoyable, and also, yeah, thank you to the Sussex Wildlife Trust for hosting the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody. Stay warm and have a great evening. Thanks for joining us.